We have lots to talk about in today's video, including a potential trade we want to discuss between the Leafs and the Hurricanes. This is only a hypothetical scenario brought up by an NHL insider, but we're going to look at the possibility of Mitch Marner for Marty Necas. Plus, we have lots of signings as well, including a few more in Utah, Florida, and Minnesota. We're going to look at least one more UFA that's unsigned where he may be heading. We have another case of a former Leaf in the front office joining the Pittsburgh Penguins, an update on the Columbus Blue Jackets coaching search, and some other news around the NHL. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about today. We'll get into the trade stuff here in just a little bit. First, we have some other items to take a look at here. First, let's start with a few more signings. We have a case today of the Florida Panthers signing UFA defenseman Adam Boqvist. He became an unrestricted free agent after he was bought out of his contract the remaining time by the Columbus Blue Jackets. He gets a 1-year, 2-way contract, league minimum, of course, at the NHL level with the Florida Panthers. Certainly, Florida has lost a lot of some key members of their blue line, so they're bringing in some options that are, you could say bargain basement, cheap options that they're hoping will exceed their contracts. The Panthers in the last couple of years have probably had, I think fair to say, probably better luck than just about any team in the NHL with finding players for good value and exceeding their contracts, signing them cheap and having them far exceed the expectation. So maybe this will be another case. Boqvist will be his third team already since being drafted. So he's certainly bounced around a lot. I think it's fair to say he hasn't quite lived up to expectations in both Chicago and Columbus. And now we'll see if he can find his game with the Florida Panthers. Maybe he'll be another example like Gustav Forsling, who they picked up off waivers and now is considered their top defenseman and one of the better defensive defensemen in the NHL. Certainly been an interesting, find there on how Florida's constructed their roster. The Minnesota Wild today came to terms with a couple of RFAs, including Declan Chisholm. He gets a 1-year, $1 million contract, and they've also signed Adam Raska, who gets a 1-year, 2-way contract, league minimum at the NHL level. In Utah, have signed recently acquired forward Igor Sokolov. He gets a 1-year, 2-way contract as well, league minimum at the NHL. Of course, Sokolov was just recently acquired via trade with the Ottawa Senators, where they swapped Sokolov and young prospect Jan Jenik, who are both similar age, similar situations, both looking for a fresh start, trying to advance their careers. So we'll see what happens. Big week for Sokolov. He just got married a few days ago as well. So certainly going to be an important year for him, no doubt, trying to see if he can finally crack the NHL and get some more time into big leagues. We got some updates as well regarding some of the pending UFAs that are out there. There's still some interesting names on the market. One name, Daniel Sprong, seems to always score no matter where he goes, yet has a hard time getting any kind of term on his contract. He's bounced around with a number of teams as of late. Was most recently in Detroit. Of course, they brought in the older Vladimir Tarasenko. Doesn't look like they're having any intentions of bringing back Sprong at this point based on how their roster looks. But there is some belief that the St. Louis Blues have some interest. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few other teams out there as well. To me, I think whoever signs this guy, again, is going to have a potential bargain deal. He's one of those players that, I was talking about here with the Panthers and what they're hoping to get out of Boqvist, that he's exceeded his deals. I'm surprised he's had a hard time because he's done well between Detroit and I believe it was Seattle for a while. He's done really everything that they've asked of him, but has a hard time getting a contract. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, to be completely honest. Now, of course, we had heard earlier today that the Toronto Maple Leafs had parted ways with Wes Clark, who was their former director of amateur scouting. Then later in the day, we found out that he was joining all of the other former Leafs that have left recently in Pittsburgh. Of course, Pittsburgh already has a number of other people, including Kyle Dubas and Jason Spezza. So Wes Clark joins them. It is a promotion opportunity for him. He'll join the Penguins as the VP of player personnel, and he will oversee the club's amateur, pro, college, and European free agent scouting, and will report directly to GM and President Kyle Dubas. So, of course, same thing when Spezza came over. He was in Toronto as a special advisor to the GM. got an opportunity to rejoin Dubas in Pittsburgh on a promotion opportunity to move up to be an assistant general manager. So there's some wonder about Brandon Pridham. I think Dubas might try to pluck him out of Toronto as well, but so far we don't have any knowledge to say that that's going to happen. But he's certainly taken a few of his guys with him to Pittsburgh. No doubt there. We've heard a lot about the last 24 hours about Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh, speaking of the Penguins, coming to terms on a contract extension, but still nothing official here as of yet. The belief is it's going to be somewhere in the 3-year range, around $10 or so million. Fair to say Sidney Crosby has been grossly underpaid for quite a long stretch. His second contract coming out of his ELC was $8.7 million, and then he signed a 12-year extension at $8.7 million. And, well, he's obviously far exceeded that. At the time, though, I think he signed that contract because that was around the time as well when he had obviously gone through a lot of medical stuff, had some concussion issues, the neck issues, and I think when they offered that contract, he took the contract thinking, I don't know how long I can play because of all those concerns that were ongoing at the time. And while obviously he's one of the few players that took one of those long-term deals and actually have seen it through, think of like Ryan Suter, Zach Parise, Ilya Kovalchuk, Luongo. A bunch of these guys never made it to the end. So he and Ovechkin are, I think, two of the very few that actually did. So no word just yet. Just it's advancing. It's close, but not done. We've also got word today that former Philadelphia Flyer goalie Carter Hart, who is one of 5 former NHL players now that are awaiting trial for sexual assault charges, may be signing in the KHL. We had heard about Dylan Dubé, of course, formerly of the Calgary Flames. I'm not sure if Dubé's officially signed. I think he might be. I didn't see the exact release, but I know there was a post on social media that he was in talks to sign there. I don't know if he officially did or not, but there is belief that Carter Hart may have an opportunity as well. So even though NHL teams don't want anything to do with these players, at least for the time being, the KHL does not have any issues of that nature. Of course, I understand the whole innocent till proven guilty thing, but NHL teams, of course, have all taken a stance that they want them to have their innocence proven in the court of law before they rejoin or have a chance to be NHLers again. So we'll see. It's going to be a while. Obviously, at this point, the belief is that we're going to get a April 2025 trial at the earliest. It could be a little bit later than that, and it's probably going to last a few months. So I'm going to say we're probably going to be around. If they were found innocent and they had a chance to clear their names, probably the beginning of the 26th season would be the earliest that they would probably be able to play a regular season. So we'll see. I don't know what's going to happen to any of these guys. I'm not sure what the future holds. Even if they are found innocent, we'll have to wait and see how everything plays out. But a couple of these guys may be playing in the KHL while they're awaiting trial. The latest updates we've heard from Aaron Portzline of The Athletic, who has that covers the beat for the CBJ team. Of course, is the latest on the coaching search that Don Waddell is conducting. It's believed it's down to 3 candidates right now, including Todd McClellan, Dean Evison, and Jay Woodcroft. So this is a combination of talking and negotiating with each of them to determine who your next coach is going to be. But there's also the other side of it, because all 3 of these coaches are still under contract with their previous clubs. Obviously, they have permission to speak to them, but when it comes to, wanting to hire them, they have to negotiate with the other team on who's going to pay how much of the salary. So, for example, if Todd McClellan's getting paid $5 million for the Los Angeles Kings and Columbus only wants to pay him $2 million, then LA would have to agree to pay the other $3 million. And, well, they may not want to do that. So there's different things that kind of get involved with players or coaches. When it comes to things like that. So we'll have to see how it goes. Obviously, there's going to be a bit of a negotiation tactic on all of these fronts. I'm not sure who the clear front runner is, but certainly likely going to be one of these 3. I've heard and seen people asking about Gerard Gallant, and it appears as though he's not been a candidate. Another player I want to touch on quickly is restricted free agent defenseman of the Edmonton Oilers, Philip Broberg. I know I listened to Frank Saravalli's one of his latest shows, and he was talking about how Broberg is a prime candidate, in his opinion, to be an offer sheet candidate by other clubs, considering where the Oilers, they've done a lot of offseason business. which is great. A lot of the signings they've done has been really good. I mean, for the most part, I like majority, if not all, of what they've done this offseason, but they left themselves at this point with no real available cap space, and they have guys like Broberg left to sign. They are going to have to definitely make a cost-cutting move. Like I said before, you were most likely going to see a player traded out of Edmonton, whether it be a Cody Ceci would probably be your number one, maybe a Brett Kulak. We saw them move Ryan McLeod for Matt Savoy. Of course, Savoy may not even be in the NHL this coming season. They may put him in the minors. We don't know. So that's definitely a cap dump of McLeod's hit coming off the books, and not a guarantee that Savoy's goes on. So clearly, that was a start. But they are going to have to make at least one more of those types of trades to move some money off the books. And while they haven't done that yet, now not to say that they wouldn't try to match, but if a team came in and wanted to offer Broberg, for example, a 4 or 5 year deal at $4 or $5 million, the compensation really wouldn't be all that high. And you'd get to yourself a pretty good defenseman who proved in the playoff run here that he can play. Probably should have been getting more of an opportunity sooner than what he was. And now the Oilers are in a situation where they don't have the space to sign him. And they would be having, depending on the contract that he was offered, would probably be forced to make more than one player a cap casualty. They'd probably end up having to move multiple players. And if you're in a predicament where you have an offer sheet and you're trying to match and you're trying to clear space, you think teams are going to help you out? No, they're going to play hardball. They're not going to take anything without, obviously, with proper incentives. So it could just put themselves in a real bad spot if anybody wants to, play that game and try to find and pluck themselves a good young defenseman. So we probably aren't going to see an offer sheet. It's rare. Of course, we saw the Montreal, Carolina stuff a couple years in a row there, but generally speaking, historically speaking, in the last 5-10 years, it's pretty rare that it happens. But to me, if you look around the NHL, I know there's some talk about, I've seen some people talking about Jeremy Swayman being a candidate, and I suppose he would be. And I addressed that a few days ago saying, in a sense, he's theoretically available. Like, he and the Bruins both have not elected salary arbitration, so they will be settling the contract on their own, which does open the possibility of a offer sheet. I have no doubt that Swayman wants to go nowhere. He wants to be a Bruin, and he wants to sign there long term. So the only way he even entertains an offer sheet is going to have to be mega bucks. Like, if somebody comes along and says they're going to offer him $9-10 million, I'm not sure how many years, maybe he signs it just to force the Bruins' hand, just to get a contract done. But what team is going to offer that and have to pay up, 3 first-round picks? And even not every team that you can even look at even has all those picks available, because you have to have the picks available, you have to have the space available, and there's just a very small pool of teams that can get that done. But if you look at the Broberg scenario, it could be a lot more manageable, and I think there's a lot of teams out there who could theoretically do it. So it doesn't mean we're going to, but if there is a scenario that makes the most sense, it might be that one. Now, I also want to take a look at some Leaf stuff. One, I was listening to insider Chris Johnson on the most recent Steve Dangle podcast, where he talked about a lot of things Leaf related. One was the Yanni Hakanpaa signing. Now, of course, we've heard a lot. It started with the Steve Simmons report in the Toronto Star, talking about how Hakanpaa's knee has been really bad shape, and that's why the Dallas Stars didn't want to sign him and bring him back. Their doctors and medical staff were convinced that he may not be able to play at all, possibly, let alone multiple years. So the Leafs reportedly were giving him $1.5 million in a 2-year term. Well, at this point, even Brad Treliving, in one of his press availabilities that he did, I think it was on July 1st, later in the day, when all the GMs were starting to speak to the media, he did reference Hakanpaa. So there's no doubt, but the team is yet to officially put out a press release announcing that signing. Now, if you look at some of the sites like, your Cap Friendlies and that, they have them listed there because enough insiders have talked about the contract. But I don't know that contract's been officially registered with the NHL and that it's officially on the books for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So again, based on what CJ was saying and based on what we have not seen from the Leafs announcing it, it does sound like it's still going through a bit of a medical review, and I do wonder what that means exactly. So that impacts their cap space. It impacts a right shot defenseman being on the team or not on the team. So that's another situation that I think we're going to have to monitor here in the coming days to see if we do get an official announcement or Will they, not get a favorable medical review and maybe opt out of it? I don't know how that's going to play out. So it's not appearing to be an official deal. So stay tuned. We'll have to monitor that. Now, of course, the big topic that Johnson was talking about on the podcast mostly was the fact that at the end of the year, we heard all the big words coming out of between Keith Belly, who comes in as the new president of MLSE, says that, I'm not here just to sell jerseys. I want to inflict a winning culture. We want a Stanley Cup. We're going to do whatever it takes to win. We're going to make all these resources available. Even, whatever we got to do. Like that was his role. You heard Brad Treliving say everything's on the table after they lost again in the first round. Obviously even Brendan Shanahan appeared more, on board with making changes, that they've had a lot of runs and opportunities with this current group, at least the core as a whole, and have never really had any sustained success beyond one series win, and was it 8 years of playoff hockey in the big city. So clearly something's got to give. Making them sit down and be like, everything's on the table, looking at the contracts. Everybody thought we would see at least one significant trade, shake things up, the most likely player being Mitch Marner because of the contract status. And while nothing has really been done, the Leafs have made a few moves. They lost Tyler Bertuzzi in free agency. They re-signed Domi. They got Tanev. The team's arguably the same or a bit better. I mean, I think the blue line is probably going to be a bit better. Tanev does make the defense better. There's no doubt about that. They bring in Anthony Stolarz, who they're quite comfortable with. But again, Stolarz and Wall both are capable goalies who have had a major injury history. Are they one injury away between the pipes from having their season go sideways on them? Not that the goalies aren't skilled or capable, but are they going to be there when you need them the most? That's the big factor. Joseph Wall had a nice season when he was playing. He had a few rough games too. I mean, there's still some growing pains there, but it just makes you wonder, right? So all in all, Leaf fans are looking at this team saying, okay, there's a few little tweaks here. We have a new backup goalie. The goaltending tandem's a little different. Samsonov goes. We bring in Stolarz. They've been after Tanev for a long time. They got him. But the forward group is largely the same. They lose Bertuzzi. Are they really better? And now they're in a situation with Marner where they either trade him, keep him, extend him. What do? You sign Matthews. He's not going anywhere. You signed Nylander long-term after an incredible start to last year. So now, and now they've all got the trade protection. Chris Johnson on the podcast said, in all honesty, and I totally agree with him, they missed their best opportunity to shake up the score, and that was at least a year ago. At that point, Marner and Nylander didn't have all this trade protection yet. They could have facilitated a trade before all that stuff kicked in and been able to shake things up that way, and it never happened. At that point, we still were hearing from Brendan Shanahan that nothing was really going to change. When Brad Treliving was first brought in as the new GM, when they let go of Kyle Dubas, first thing they did was call the core four guys and let them know that everything was okay, nobody was moving. They just seem to be really terrified of moving on from this core group of guys, but yet they continue to not get the job done in the playoffs every year. So eventually they were talking, and Chris Johnson brought up the trade idea. And again, I'm not saying that he's not saying this is being discussed by the teams. He's not saying that this is probably going to happen or anything of that nature. He just said, because of the scenario involving Carolina, because they were talking about teams that got better and didn't get better and all that, would you trade Marty Necas for Mitch Marner? And Steve on the show said yes, he would, mainly because the group as a whole has failed to get the job done and they need to do something different. Of course, you got to be careful with that, though, because like I've said before, as much as you want to make a trade, you can't just make a trade for the sake of making a trade. Arguably, if you take a look at these two, it's an interesting thought. Carolina has been one of those teams that have been very interested in the combination of Nylander and Marner for a number of years, as they've gone through their not only recent negotiations for their contract extension, like with Nylander, but even dating back to when Nylander and Marner both were getting their last contract. They both had long, drawn-out somewhat contentious negotiations where they played hardball to get exactly what they wanted. And during the whole time when things were kind of getting to a point where there were some, is this going to work out moments, the Hurricanes were one of the teams that were always linked saying, well, if they are going to move them, this is one of the teams to watch. They've had their eye on them. There's no doubt about it. Obviously, the thing is, though, is Marner has a lot of say right now because he's got the no-move clause. Marty Necas may not have that in his contract, but he's already basically vetoed a few trades that have been close with the Hurricanes because he is an RFA. He needs to sign a new contract, and if the team he's going to is not a team he wants to sign with, well, they're not going to trade for him if he's not going to be happy to be there. There's speculation that they were close to getting a deal done with the Buffalo Sabres. He wouldn't go. There's been some talk when the trade that involved Winnipeg and getting Dylan Coughlin, that there was talks about a bigger trade and other pieces involved on both sides, and that Necas could have been part of it, as well as Nick Ehlers. And again, the belief is that he didn't want to sign with the Winnipeg Jets. So, he's obviously going to eventually get what he wants, whether, he's going to continue to play hardball until he does. So would he go to Toronto and sign? We don't know the answer to that, but it's a interesting concept. And the question is that I wanted to put everybody out here that's watching this is, would you make that trade, and do you really think the Leafs get better? And do you make a trade for the sake of making a trade to shake things up? I say you don't. I mean, as much as I do agree that running it back again, because essentially it feels like you're running it back less Bertuzzi, I don't know if it's the wise thing to do, but you've put yourself in this spot. The Leafs have put themselves in a very difficult position where you've given these four guys a ton of money, all the leverage, all the trade protection, and now you want to make changes, and they're like, yeah, sorry, I don't really think I'm feeling that today. And they hold all the cards. It's just that simple. I mean, for them to lose Mitch Marner as a free agent next year would be absolutely atrocious asset management, but it's trending in that direction. If they really want to shake things up, getting Marner to a new team, like if they don't want to sign him long term, that's what's going to happen. Tavares is off the books after the coming season in the fall. He's got 1 year left, so I mean theoretically your cap situation gets better. From just from that perspective, keeping Marner around if he would sign a little bit more favorable contract would be better. But again, he's already making like around close to $11 million, and its belief is he's going to probably want at least that or more. It's just tough to do when that team and that group has not won. And if you don't want to look at the playoff stats, I know he gets a lot of crap for not being a playoff performer, but really, if you look at Marty Necas, has Marty Necas been a better playoff performer? No, he hasn't. He's a little bit younger than Marner. He's a little bit bigger than Marner. I mean, Marner shows on the his stat line being about 6 feet tall, about 185, whereas Necas is listed as 6'2", about, I think he's 190, 195, like closer to 200. So he's about 2 inches taller and about 10 pounds heavier. So yeah, he's a bit bigger, but does he really play like a more aggressive, more, physical style of game that constitute playoff hockey? Not really. If you look at their playoff stats, Necas has 30 points in 59 playoff games, whereas Marner has 50 points in 57 playoff games. So yeah, he hasn't produced in the absolute biggest moments. It seems like the bigger the game, the bigger the moment, that's when Marner tends to crater and kind of not do well. He seems to cave to the pressure. But Necas hasn't exactly been out there lighting it up and tearing everything down either. But at the same time, he hasn't always been given top-line moments and, all the same sort of scenarios that Marner's had lots of. So not exactly apples to apples, but still, it's a scenario that I'd be very careful with. I guess the one advantage is that with Marner's salary, you can probably sign Necas, let's say maybe for $8 million, let's just say, and that still leaves you, around 3 or so to add another player. So if you can think of it that way, because you have to add value for the additional cap space, that either a player that comes with Necas from Carolina, or that you can make a move for with another team, free agency, whatever, you can get a better mix. So from that perspective, maybe that starts to sway some opinions a little bit. If you can get Marty Necas and a $3 million player, Well, that's maybe a little bit different. Now, what do you think of that? Now, do you make that trade? Do you move on from Marner? I do think long-term, Necas might be able to, I stress might because we don't know, give you similar production to Marner. But I don't know. I mean, these are both players that they have a lot of talent. There's a lot of skill. And sometimes both teams feel the same way, that sometimes they leave you wanting more, and that you wish that they would kind of take that, whatever it takes mentality to take that next step in the playoffs. That a lot of players, until they learn to win and really learn to overcome those things, like the grinding things out, the blocking the shots, like all the dirty things that you don't really want to do, that's where you earn your paychecks the most. And when you get the chance to get over the hump to win the Stanley Cup, and it's not easy, and it's not every player has it in their DNA to go out there and do those things. And I understand why the Leaf fan base seems to want to change things up, but it's tricky. It's really tricky. In all honesty, as much as we want to see change and think that they should change it up, it's going to be really difficult to find a trade. And I guess that's part of the reason why, too, that we haven't heard more rumors about the Leafs talking to Marner, seeing if he'll waive was no move or not. And because from what CJ was saying, which makes sense, they're not going to approach him about waiving until they have a trade that they want to do. And at this point, he believes that they have talked internally, that they are willing to trade him if the right deal comes along. And at this point, no team has really talked to them and made an offer that's significant enough that they were willing to go to him and say, hey, what do you think of this? Would you consider this? We'd like to move forward if you'll waive. And until that happens, there's not going to be any speculation, really, I don't think, about a Marner trade. So, I don't know. I mean, to me, like I said before, there's a few teams that do make a lot of sense. At 1.2 with Carolina, like I said, as much as they've had their eye on this player as well as Nylander for an extended time, they could have gotten another defenseman like a Brett Pesce. Well, he's not there anymore. They can't trade him. The Leafs would love to add a top end D if they can remove Marner. Well, Carolina doesn't really have that to move anymore. So, again, that's not easy. It would have to be something like a Necas type of trade would be the only kind of deal that Carolina would be able to do. Carolina's not the same team they once were, so not going to be easy to do. I think a team like Vegas, for example, has more assets and more options for them that would make a lot more better trade partner to me if they're going to pull this off. So maybe, and I don't know if Vegas has any interest or if they'll approach the Leafs about that throughout the offseason or not. But let me know your thoughts. If you're Brad Treliving and Brendan Shanahan, do you really consider a Marner for Necas trade? Do you think it makes them better? Do you think that this is a deal that you do for the sake of shaking things up, that you're not going to get worse? Or is there too much risk here, and do you just ride it out and see what happens and decide later on next year or into either at the end of next season or somewhere along the line, depending on how it goes, about Marner's future? Because to me, this seems too risky. And if you're not going to get a better offer, you just let him play out the year and you figure out a way to navigate the situation at a later time, and you try to win the Stanley Cup next year and see what happens and make your decisions later. But let me know your thoughts on that possibility down in the comments. We'll discuss further, as well as the other news items that we talked about here today. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.